I want to tell you about a contest that we have going on. It's simple to enter, hopefully easy for you to win. It includes a package for travel, flight and hotel for two, rental car as well, $1,500 value, plus a staff pass for Glazier Clinics valued at $399. And all you need to do is go to glazierclinics.com/win. We've collaborated with Glazier to get this package for you. We're going to have the drawing for this on December 12th, which is the 5-year anniversary of the podcast. Again, go to glazierclinics.com/win to register. We're back again with another day to discuss defense, and on this episode, we're going to focus on University of Houston, who right now has the number 6 defense in the country. They're led by defensive coordinator Doug Belk, and joining me to discuss and break down the Houston defense is DJ Eliot. Coach, great to have you back again.
Glad to be here.
Coach, before we got going, we were talking a little bit about D3 football and some different things. You pointed out to me that roommates in college at Cal Lutheran, a D3 school, with Tom Herman and Dave Arand. I found that very interesting. And then when we were looking at Doug Belk here, we saw that he went to Carson Newman, so he's another D3 guy.
Yeah, there are a lot of great coaches that play Division III football. And it's to no surprise because sometimes the best players are the ones that had to really work the hardest on being the best they could be just to get on the field. Mm-hmm. And so they spent a lot of time studying the game. And Division III football players usually are guys that truly love football. You know, because they're not on scholarship. They have to pay their way, but yet they're still going to go out there and play football. So to no surprise that a lot of great coaches, in my mind, have played Division III football. And I've met a lot in my career of guys that were Division III football players, whether it was Cal Lutheran, like you mentioned, Tom Herman and Dave Aranda, or even Eddie Gran went to Cal Lutheran too, or Mary Hardin Baylor, or Hardin Simmons in Texas, and obviously the lineage of coaches that went through John Carroll and Mount Union. It's just very interesting to see how many good coaches come out of playing Division III football, and Doug Belk here at Houston is doing an excellent job, and that's just another example of a great coach that played Division III football.
Absolutely. It's great. Being a D3 guy myself, it's great to see those guys getting to the top of the game here. So, Coach, this game was a nickel game against Temple. A lot of nickel defense. So let's just start with some of the basics that you saw here. I know brackets was one of those things.
Right. So Houston, to no surprise, is very similar to Alabama. Coach Belk spent 3 years as a graduate assistant at Alabama, and his system looks a lot like Alabama's. And versus 11 and 10 personnel, he is an exclusively nickel defense. And one of the things that I noticed that he was playing brackets, and so that is a coverage that is a quarters coverage to where the nickel and the safety are bracketing the slot. So the nickel is an outside leverage and the safety is an inside leverage. And between the two of those guys, they're going to take an inside or an outside cut of the slot. And then if the slot goes vertical, then it turns into a double on the slot with one underneath and one over the top. They were playing that coverage on first down, and they were creating an 8-man spacing run fit. So if you played a double bracket concept where you were bracketing both slots, then your run fit issues are a little different, and you may be in a lighter box. You may have to stunt the front. You may have to two-gap the front in order to make up for your run fit issues, having both DBs on the slots outside of the number 2. But what Houston was doing is, depending on where the back was, that was where they were playing brackets to. And then away from the back, they were playing a read coverage. And that allowed them to get what I call an 8-man spacing run fit and get the linebacker / DB that is away from the back to be involved in the run fit. And they ran the ball. Houston fit it perfectly, and they got a stop. And then they also had a few times where they attacked the slot, and they got a double on that guy. Now, it's important if that slot goes out in brackets that safety now is a free player, and he can either zone his quarter, he can either push the middle, whatever you've coached him to do to play once he frees up. Now, when they fly motioned across out of brackets, they went to 3. And that's a good adjustment because that allows your front to stay intact and allows them to have their eyes in the same spots for run fits. So anytime you get a fly or you get an orbit motion, a lot of times, like I said in the previous podcast, offenses are doing that in order to get the defensive players to move their eyes so they're in the wrong location for a run fit. But if you're in a bracket coverage and you get that type of motion, an easy adjustment is to just rock it to a single high, and that allows your core to stay your core and allows those inside linebackers to keep their eyes in the same spot and fit the run. And Houston was doing that. On third down, they were in quarter halves, and there was a tight split to the boundary, and it was the half side, and number 1 went under right away. Anytime that you're playing halves, you can carry the vertical 2, which almost every team does on the half side, with what I call the vertical hook defender, okay? You could just zone it off and play the hook, but now there's going to be a lot of stress on that half-field player because nobody's playing underneath the vertical 2, so nobody's forcing that throw to go high if that number 2 would go vertical and have that half-field player have a chance to make a play on it. Mm-hmm. But when you're carrying the vertical at 2, if 1 comes under 5, the guy that carries the vertical at 2 can now drop the vertical and zone it off. And the reason is because now there's only 1 vertical for that half-field safety to have to cover. He doesn't have to split 2 verticals and get depth and read the quarterback and break on the ball. Now there's only 1 vertical that he has to cover, so there's no need to carry the vertical at 2. And Houston did that and did a good job, and that guy zoned it off and got underneath the dig and made a nice play doing that. And that was on a third down, and it was a critical down for them, and they got off the field.
Let me ask you a question on that one. Again, kind of getting to the training of that, right? If you're keying things like that, and you're going to see that guy come underneath and be able to let him go, it's going to take a little bit of training the eyes, especially, right? Making sure that guy has that vision, that he's not completely locked on one guy, that he starts to see that. So training that, practicing that, what are some of the things that you like to do?
That is from a communication standpoint. You know, I still remember when I was a college football player and we were playing halves, the coaching point that my position coach gave me was level, look, and listen. And what he was telling me to do is to level the number 2 on a vertical, look at number 1, and listen to the corner. I still remember that like it was yesterday. And the communication from the corner is critical there because the vertical hook player is going to be so concerned about carrying that vertical. And when he carries that vertical, it's a low hip carry because he knows he has help over the top. And all he's trying to do is force a high throw so that the safety has time to break on it. But the corner's communication is critical. And as soon as he hears that end call or whatever you decide to use, now he knows that he can drop it. And the corner is going to make the end call when he sees the shoulders of the number 1 receiver turned and he sees him go underneath the linebacker. That's when he's going to make that end call. That's critical when you're working halves. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different combinations that you have to be able to cover in a halves coverage, and that's why half line is a great drill for this coverage. And so, you know, you work half of the formation and you work 2 receivers or 2 eligibles over there, and you just have them do all the different combination routes that they need to do within the coverage and work on the communication and work on the vision between the players that are involved in that combination. If you're going to be a halves team, then you have to spend a lot of times doing that. Houston was running quarter halves, and that makes it a little bit easier because there's only halves to one side, mm-hmm. and there's still quarters to the other side. But it's critical that you work that and you get good at it.
Last week we spent a lot of time talking about different ways to handle motion, and I know you saw a man free where they rocked.
Correct. So Houston was running match 3 and they were running man free. And a lot of times, depending on what type of motion it is and depending on what coverage it is, determines how you're going to adjust it. And when they were in match 3 and they got fly motion, then they bumped it over and they played zone. And when they were in man free, they rocked it and they continued to stay on their man, and the safeties rocked, and the safety came down and covered the guy that was in motion. But it was a good changeup, like I said, with brackets, because they did the same thing out of brackets. When they were in brackets and they got fly motion, they rocked it. So they were able to hold the same disguise and adjust the motions the same way, whether they were in man free or whether they were in brackets. Another difference between match 3 and between man free is how you cover the back. Man free is a better pass rush defense because you coach the inside backers to hug the back when he steps up, and then that gives you another rusher. All right, and that also gives you one less eligible going out. And Houston did a good job of that. As soon as that back stepped up, the inside linebacker that side went and got him, and the other player played the rat, and they gave him some good pressure. They were also seeing some Y motion in their man-free defense. And one thing that I coach is we rock the motion on fly and orbit and even a cross motion if we're in man-free with the wide receivers. But if it's a core motion, like a tight end motion, an H-back or a Y motion, or there's 2 backs and there's a motion, then you bump that motion within the core. Mm-hmm. Because if not, you'll start getting yo-yo motion from a tight end, and now here's your safeties going back and forth because of the yo-yo motion, when it's just as easy to just bump any core motion and allow the DBs to stay in the same place. And that's what Houston did. Once they got a Y motion, a yo-yo motion, what I mean by that is the Y going back and forth, then they just bumped that. They even did that when they had a 2-speed that was a tight end. Mm-hmm. That tight end had a return motion. A lot of offenses will line their tight end up as a wide receiver and then return him into the backfield. Well, when that happened, Houston bumped that as well, because it just went from a tight end that was outside the core to a tight end that's inside the core. So there's no need to rock it.
Are you having those guys identify that, what you're going to do by who the personnel is, or what's the way that's going to get communicated? Because I have seen a lot of teams doing that. I never really did that much. Usually if I was going to move somebody, I was going to change strength, was one of the main things I wanted to do. But I have seen a lot this year, that kind of motion with that guy either coming into the backfield or starting out wide and just coming to off the ball next to the tackle to that spot there.
That's exactly right. That's alerted pre-snap based on the personnel. As soon as you recognize that there's a tight end that is lined up outside the core and off the ball, then you're going to communicate with the backers before the snap, hey, whatever your terminology is, but what you're saying is, when this guy motions, I'm not going to rock this with the safety. I want to bump this with the backers. And that is a pre-snap communication. I did see Houston run a simulated man-free pressure, and it was an inside backer and an outside backer and a 3-technique slanting to the same side, and the inside backer away was hugging the back, and the outside linebacker away was becoming a rat player. I think this is a good pressure because you can bring it from wherever you want, and it doesn't affect the back end. Anytime that you're running a man-free pressure where the DB is not involved in the blitz, then if the back trades and you want to run it to the back or away from the back, now you can check the protection the other way. If you want to run it to the tight end and the tight end trades, now you can check it and run it the other way. I think this is a good pressure, and it's a safe pressure because you also get a hole player for any quick game / screens that you may see. They ran that on 3rd and 8. Also on 3rd down, they lined up in a bare front with the inside linebacker as the 0. Same thing that we saw last week from Wyoming. They were presenting, this was 3rd and 14, they were presenting Bear the offense probably to get the protection that they wanted from the offense. And then they ran a twist game out of that Bear front, and they got a sack. They were able to line up and present pair with really a better zero rusher because that was a linebacker instead of a nose guard. And then with the twist, the 3 technique came clean, and they were playing 5-man, man-free behind it.
Coach, I know we're going to talk a little bit about match 3 here, and also the difference between different types of match 3. So looking at a Nick Saban match 3 versus a Vic Fangio match 3.
Houston was running a combination of 1 rat and match 3, and there's a difference in those two, and there's strength and weaknesses in both of those. The 1 rat that I saw them run was 1Y and also 1S, which is where the DB either comes down to the tight end or he comes down away from the tight end. And like I mentioned earlier, when they were in 1Y, when that tight end motion, they did not rock the secondary because it was a core motion. So the safety hadn't even come down yet in 1Y, and the tight end motion can end up being a bump. Well, when they were in week 3, the weak side of the formation safety was coming down into the box, and any type of motion was a bump and not a rock because it was zone. Their corners were off, and the reason that they're off is because if number 1 goes in, then they now have to become a 3rd player. And so it's hard to become a 3rd player on a vertical of number 2 when 1 goes in if you're pressed. The Nick Saban match 3 system derived from cover 3. And so everything was built from cover 3, and then match principles were added. The Vic Fangio match 3 system derived from fire zone. And when I say fire zone, I'm talking about a man match fire zone. I'm not talking about a zone fire zone. I'm talking about a man match fire zone. So the play of the corners in a Nick Saban match 3 system is a little bit different than the play of the corners in a Vic Fangio match 3 system. In a Nick Saban match 3 system, think of it as zone first with match principles that tell you now we have to match it up. And from the Vic Fangio system, think of it as man principles first with some zone options when we need to make them. You know, the name of one of the hook defenders in the Vic Fangio system is called the bonus hooker. And the reason is because in a fire zone blitz, there's only 1 hook defender. So when they added another hook defender, they called it a bonus hooker. The name of the hook defenders in the Nick Saban system are the hook and 3 through players. They're playing the strong and the weak hook, but then their matchup responsibility is 3 through the zone. So I can tell that Doug Belk is coming from Nick Saban match 3 system because when he was in match 3, Houston had their corners off a lot. And if it came from the Vic Fangio system, then the corners would be pressed a lot. Another difference between match 3 and 1 rat is how you play the hook defenders. So I talked about how in 1 rat, one of the inside linebackers to the side of the back, when the back steps up, can hug rushing, and the other one becomes rep player. And that's good for pass rush. It's also good for slip screen because it puts a guy on the back as soon as he steps up so that he can't get blocked by the offensive line that are releasing for the screen. Now, if you were in a match 3, as soon as that guy stepped up, those inside backers are going to drop, which is now going to put them in a worse situation to develop the screen. So Houston was doing a good job of mixing up match 3 and 1 rat because you couldn't get them on the weaknesses of either one of those.
All right, Coach. Well, one we haven't talked about here, and I have in my notes that you're going to talk about is a fishtail. So, and I asked you this question too, because I haven't heard the term before. What is a fishtail?
Houston was disguising 2 high to 1 high. And they wanted to hold their 2 shell as long as they could. And one way that they did that was they would fishtail the middle of the field player to the middle of the field. And when I say fishtail, I mean he is not working to the middle of the field until the ball snaps. And he's turning his shoulders and he's running to the middle of the field, and his shoulders stay turned. He's never in position to square up. The good thing about this is it's a very late disguise to single high, so it can confuse the quarterback. The bad thing about this is he's not going to have as much ground that he can cover as the middle field player. When you go from a 2 high to a single high, you can rue it off the snap indicator, which means there's something that the offense is doing to let you know that the snap's coming, and you roll to it. You can line up in it, which means he just lines up in the middle of the field. Or you can fishtail to it, which means you don't go to the middle of the field until the ball snaps and you keep your shoulders turned the whole time. Well, obviously, the strengths and the weaknesses to those 3 ways of doing it are executing your assignment and disguising your look. So you want to decide what is more important going into each game. Do I need to hold my disguise longer because this quarterback is so talented in his pre-snap keys that if I give him a pre-snap key, he's going to put the ball exactly where it needs to be? Or do I need to line up in the middle of the field so that I can execute my assignment better and I can have more range? Or in between, which is I'm going to hold it as long as I can, but eventually I've got to get to the middle of the field before the ball snaps so that I can execute my assignment. In this game, Houston was fishtailing. So that's one of the ways that you can get to the middle of the field with the middle of the field player. And that's the best way to do it if you're trying to show single high as long as you can.
Coach, I agree with you on quarterbacks who can find those kind of keys. And I know offenses work really hard at getting that. And we've seen different ways, and we've gone from that era where they'd hard count you to now guys sometimes using they're going to clap or they're going to fake clap to see if they could get that guy to move. In your opinion, what are some of the toughest things that your guys have to face that they need to be patient with? Or what's the toughest thing they present that you have to handle?
Whatever the snap indicator is depends on if they have something that fakes it, like you said, whether it's a fake clap or whether it's the footstep or whether it's the center's head when it pops up. But I will tell you that one key for defensive coaches that I would definitely study when I'm looking at the snap indicator from offenses is the play clock. I would study at what time on the play clock do they usually snap the ball. And if it's a tendency, then I would have the safeties look at the play clock more than I would have them look at something on the offense to determine what their stem is.
Yeah, I like that one. That's definitely one to use. I've seen, especially at the NFL level, the defensive linemen using that they're watching the clock and they see it hitting close to hit 1 and they're off the ball, right? Because a lot of times in the NFL they're holding those counts right down to the end. I love that idea on your side of the ball. That's a great one to understand, play clock, to put that into your game plan.
And play clock is something that isn't easily studied because our video is intercut, So we don't necessarily know what the play clock is from a college video when the ball snaps. That's something you have to study the TV copy in order to figure that out.
Right.
So,
well, Coach, what did you see next?
Anytime you're disguising single high and 2 high, what is your disguise with a speed 2 away from the nickel 2? Your linebacker has to show that he's walked out and then come back in if it's a single high, or he has to do the other way. He has to show that he's in the box and then walk out late when he's in a two high. And Houston was doing a good job of disguising that with their linebacker too. I also saw Houston run on third down. They ran an inside backer blitz from the weak side of the formation, and then they played man to that side, and they played brackets on the slot away. I don't know if they called that or if they checked it because they had a speed 2 over the weak side. Anytime that you want to run a corner or a safety blitz from the boundary and you get a speed 2, then you can check linebacker blitz, and now the linebacker comes. And Houston played brackets to the field side or the passing strength, and they ran a dig route and had a great double on that.
So, Coach, last thing, situational red zone. Wanted to talk about the red zone today.
So like we've mentioned before in the red zone, there's no need to have a post player. If you're going to play single high defense in the red zone, assign him to do something. And Temple got down in the red zone, and Houston called a single high defense, and I think it was a Q call. The safety flat-footed and make sure it wasn't a Q run, and then he just became a free player. He didn't play the middle of the field. He just became a free player and broke on the quarterback's eyes, and I thought that was a good job.
Coach, another great job on breaking down one of the top defenses right now in the country, and it's been an exciting season so far. As I've said, over the course of the season, a lot of twists and turns and changes, and it's been crazy now. We've even seen a lot of coaching changes happening early, but amongst all that, certainly a lot we can learn and a lot I've learned here in talking ball with you.
I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed getting to know other coaches that have listened to this podcast. If you follow me on Twitter at Coach Eliot and you're a coach, I will follow you back, because that allows me now to start collaboration with you about football. So please follow me so we can talk ball. I've enjoyed visiting on this podcast as well as getting to know all the coaches that listen to this podcast. It's been a lot of fun.
And speaking of podcasts, you have another one, Home Visit. Tell our listeners about Home Visit in case they've missed that one.
Home Visit is a podcast that Tyler Siskey and I do, and we talk about hot topics in college football, and we pick games with the spreads on who we think is going to win. And it is another good podcast. It's very interesting. It's a lot of fun, and I encourage you to listen to it.
Coach, again, thank you for your time, and look forward to talking ball with you again.
You too, Keith. I appreciate it.
Thank you again for listening to the Coaching Coordinator Podcast. Again, we've pulled some strings for you, and we have collaborated with Glacier to offer that package to win a flight, hotel, rental car, and a Glacier staff pass. Go to glazierclinics.com/win.